Hello, welcome to the Bible Standard. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop a comment in the comments area if you have any questions. We'll do our best to...
Welcome to our second session of 2 sessions on raising children, bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And a special welcome to the children who might be listening in on what we parents and adults are talking about today. We all want to be good parents, and we all want to contribute to the process of children becoming a group of people and individuals who love God, who are committed to the Lord Jesus Christ, who are convicted in the scriptures themselves, who pray always, who in the end are a people that dedicate their life to the service of God's ecclesia. And so we go beyond the natural in these things to the spiritual. And today we hope to cover the following 3 things. We've added a section on questions from last week. There are about 10 comments, clarifications, questions that came to us. And we're going to talk about 4 of those very briefly, just because they won't be a part of the regular content going forward. The others are already integrated there. The second thing we're going to look at is 5 challenging questions that I have for you, and obviously for myself as well. And those will start with the younger age groups and move through to the older age groups, and then ultimately include all of us. The third section is talking about these phases, 0 to 6, 7 to 12, and 13 to 21. And what we really want to focus on today is just the progression from one phase to the other. And God willing, next week we'll look at one phase at a time and go just a little bit deeper once again. So, questions from session 1. One question that was asked to us was, what would be some examples of matters that you experienced that you think could go either way and maybe do not make a difference in the end? We made a reference to this, but we didn't give any examples. So one example might be the fact that as a family, we decided at memorial meeting that we would always sit as a family. And in other meetings, we would allow our children to sit with other families or children as age appropriate, but we always ask them to sit in front of us. Now, others may not follow that same practice. This is one of those things that we chose to do, but different people are going to do some of these things a different way, and they're not things that are hard and fast. You try to put practices into place that are going to support the main principles, but people are going to go about some of these things in different ways. Is that the end of the world one way or the other? I wouldn't say it is. You can do something different, I suppose, as a family. Whoops. Let's give one more example of that. Maybe a little more significant one to think about. Let's say the use of jewelry or ear piercing. Our family decided that we would not do this with our children. We would let them become sisters and adults and decide that later on in life for themselves based on the scriptural passages that are involved in this. Having said that, again, you come to realize over time that there's cultural aspects to this. There's obviously the general norm that's out there, and maybe different ways of looking at that in a family. So again, this isn't an area that is necessarily an area that you're going to be overly critical about. We're going to accept that there's, again, difference of viewpoints and how that we're actually going to implement these types of things. Do they make a difference in the end? I don't think they in themselves are necessarily going to do that. Once again, the idea is that we're making these decisions in relation to the bigger picture principles, and sometimes that's going to be different from one family to another. So there's a couple of examples with what we referenced last week. Question 2, you emphasize what parents do, but God does the calling. What if God has not chosen them or your child? We did say that we have no expertise of our own, that we're fully dependent on God's word, that we pray regularly, and we did pray for our children on a regular basis. And it was always with, if it be thy will. We always knew that in the end, everything is according to God's will. And yet we still accept that general principle that we ought to dedicate a child to godly ways, and they will adhere to those when they are older. That's the general principle that we adhere to. And I guess I just asked back, what is the practical impact of thinking, well, maybe God has not chosen my child? And I'd say two comments to that. One is we don't really focus on that at all. There's no real practical impact because we're all going to do our best anyway. It's not like we're going to look back and say, well, we're going to do less because our child might not be selected by God. We would never look at it that way. And similarly, I would just say, as it relates to our comments on success, we'd never give up hope. If our child does turn to the world, we always keep hope that whatever we've provided for them, that someday that will be impactful sufficiently that they will come back to the truth. As remote as that might seem, I don't think you ever want to give up hope. Some people come back to the truth decades later, and that would be on the basis of those roots that later on take effect and someone repents and comes back to the truth. So we always keep hope for that. The third question is, what if we did not have the benefit of beginning child rearing in the truth? What if our children are influenced by things we did that we cannot undo? Well, as we indicated last week, there's lots of imperfect situations. You've got single parents. You've got one parent out of the truth, one in the truth. You may come to the truth and you have teenagers, and that can be a huge challenge. And some people have had that challenge and have been successful or not in those particular situations. If you have single digit age children, then in that situation, certainly you got some catching up to do, but you should be able to, with God's blessing, overcome things. Make a plan, and knowing what's at stake, you know it's all about life eternal, so you're going to do whatever you possibly can. And I would just say the general premise of the scriptures and the saving message is that we all are in sin. We all have done things bad. We all got the problem of the world in us. And all of us have had to have bad beginnings in some sense, to put away the old man and to take on the new. So we're not, even if we've been raised in the truth, unfamiliar with that, but we do realize that there can be added layers of challenge there. If you've begun the process in the world, you've got to try to move on, as the scriptures speak of, in terms of thinking differently and in terms of acting differently and making a plan and doing your best to move forward. And that's what the truth is always about. We can't do anything about the past. We gotta move on to the future. We gotta forget what's there and move on positively, because we all got things that are back there that are helpful to us in moving forward. The last one we'll comment on are, what are examples of what you think you could have done better? I could come up with more examples, but I will just give you one. I would say that in our home, we could have made use of music better, in terms of the kids singing songs more naturally, more often, outside of maybe the structure. We all enjoy the hymns and the singing of various choirs and various opportunities over the years and with bringing up children. But we've seen it in our own children that they have with our grandchildren, maybe integrated song in a more impactful way. And so that's something I look back and say, yeah, we could have done a better job with that and had that as a bigger impact in the lives of the children. So what we're going to do now is move on to question number 1. This is focused on teenagers, which are in the other session, but definitely the younger of us in our midst, because some of us really don't have any opportunity to change this. It is what it is. And again, We work with what we've chosen at this point. We can't be, saddled with burdens and regrets. We got to move on with where we're at. But, we say to the youngest who have some choices to make here, why would you choose an occupation? And for those of us that are a little bit older, I accept an attractive promotion if it meant not being with your family many evenings and weekends. Now, I ask all of these 5 challenging questions because I think they're very practical for parenting. And also they're all related to maybe things which have been a temptation for myself. So here's the challenging question. Why would we do that? Choose your occupation wisely here and think about commitment in the ecclesial life on a regular basis, which is basically the same thing as family life. You want to be there for evenings and weekends. Those are very impactful for the father to be critically involved in the family at dinner time, reading the Bible, contributing to discipline and instruction of children in a consistent and regular manner. Sometimes the mother makes up for dad's situation in the family. But again, these choices are important. And if you can be unified together and both be present with the same purpose, you're putting yourself in the best position when raising children. Challenging question number 2. We move on to young marrieds. Income level. Are you committed to having one parent forgo full-time work despite the sacrifice of income to prioritize the discipline and instruction of the children, specifically their spiritual growth as a godly seed? And this, of course, is highly relevant to teenagers and young people as well as they choose their path. Are you kind of looking at this from a perspective of doing this on the basis of surviving on a single income in the family, or at least mainly a single income in the family? How committed are we to this? If we're blessed with children, to have a mother focused on raising the children. And of course, potential mothers can look at it. How can I have employment before this stage to assist with the family plan with respect to this? And maybe, if necessary, in some way, some part-time manner to supplement the household income if that is needed. Now, we've already covered this off scripturally in the myth of quality time or opposed to quantity time in our previous section, but I want to address that again because this was a point that was indicated was unclear. So let me just say that in the world, in some philosophical circles, people say that all you need is quality time. That's what's important. And the kids can be given out to others for the vast majority of time. We believe that's not the case. Deuteronomy chapter 6 indicates that quantity time is very important. But we have to note that quantity time varies in the degree of quality time. In fact, the very fact that you're with your children so much provides special opportunities for quality discipline and instruction when various situations arise that would not otherwise be available to you. But clearly, as it was pointed out to me, it's not all about just being present. It is about using the opportunity in your presence with the children to consistently direct them to a standard behavior and attitude that you want to see. And so quality time is important within the quantity time or period of time. Quality time, of course, is very important to the father because if he is out working all the time, then he's going to be looking for those specific opportunities as a family group or as with the individuals in the family. And as children increase in number, potentially, that becomes a greater and greater challenge. We know we live in a rich society, relatively speaking to the past, and in a country relative to other countries. But at the same time, things are very expensive. And so, again, we had that session on money, which was good to help us think through needs and wants. And of course, there's a big difference, and we all struggle with that. But that series helped us think these things through. And so in the end, we're all going to choose how to live life. But we just want to say at this part that, it's really important to consider the children's spiritual growth and not compromise the role of the mother and the work that needs to be done for them. Really hard to see all this in advance, right? and to work this all out. It's the wisdom of prudence in youth, but again, very challenging to sort this all out in advance, but we commend these thoughts to the younger in our midst to consider. Bottom line, some people are going to choose an employment path that's going to allow one income. Others are not. And some of those who don't will, at setting aside a great deal of earning potential, still devote that time to their children. And others of us are going to try to work through that to the best of our abilities. Unfortunately, maybe sometimes children are sacrificed in the pursuit of a higher income. And that's what we're addressing here. Everyone needs to think that through. Third question, now to young parents. Living in isolation. I think this is a big one. Do you consider living in isolation away from other Christadelphians as a viable option? Giving up the association and support of other families and the ecclesia for your children. I think the best answer to this one is no. But temptations are there and they're significant. You can find locations which are cheaper to live in, that there might be an opportunity for more income in other places, warmer climates, things which are very attractive to us. I can remember being tempted by certain things that way from an employment perspective, which would have meant a degree of isolation, less ecclesial activity and appointments and responsibility. And some people might even see that as a positive. But that equates really, in my mind, to a decision to spiritually decline. If you want to raise your kids, well, you can't rely on a Christadelphian school, Sunday school, a youth group to do it for you. You shouldn't do that. You want everything going for them. And to have that extra positivity and that spiritually sound influence is far better. I can just say that I've visited many people over the years in isolation. And when you're visiting with a couple, a brother and sister, you might say, well, these are Christadelphians. Everything looks normal. And then you see their children. And their children are going out with children in the world because that's all there is. And the evidence of worldliness in the children becomes very, very apparent. They don't have an ecclesia. They don't have role models. They don't have other family members that are working to the same objective. So you might say, well, what about mission work? I mean, that's a good time to go away and work in the mission field. It can be very isolated if you have younger children. But where is the line where you say then, I can do this for a number of years, but where does it happen that now I might be sacrificing my own children while I'm trying to save others? You certainly want to be doing this type of work from a position of strength and not to overestimate our own influence and strength in our children's lives. Okay, question number 4, parents with older children. Would you be willing to uproot and move if that seemed necessary to save your children? Or you're losing control and the child is entangled with things and or people in the world that have them seriously off track. And so, sadly, some people have been here, and sadly, some have not acted soon enough. Some have acted and have saved their children and their family. Maybe in some situations, they've just had their child actually move and in with another family in the truth in some other location. And that has been impactful. It's obviously related to the previous challenging question as well, but this is something we unfortunately might have to face as a parent if things are going in the wrong direction. It could be that children get involved with the wrong group, with drinking, drugs, and other types of trouble, and you lose control and you get a little bit desperate. And if you can't do anything in the current situation, this might be your only opportunity to disentangle your child from a very bad situation. And our last question, this is for everybody. Say and do. Is what you are teaching your children consistent with how you are yourself living, or are you teaching them one thing and practicing in a different way? And this is not just for parents, this is for grandparents, this is for everybody in the ecclesia, as we are one family. And we can never lose sight of the genuine nature of the truth in terms of living it. When we have little children, we can put them to bed and have time for ourselves and kind of do what we want. But before long, the children are old enough to be up at the same time. In time, they might be up longer than we are. So remember the power of example. And I raise this almost embarrassingly to say that in some ways, kids motivated us to do the right thing just because, well, we're not going to do that because that would be a bad example to the kids. And we want them to have this standard. And, it's a little bit funny to reason it that way because really, if you're thinking that way, well, why would you not just be in concert with the things that you think are right and not a good example in front of the children? I'm not saying there's not things which are things that we need to distinguish between what children can be involved in and see and do, but nevertheless, I think you get the point here. Our example needs to be consistent with the things that we are preaching. The other aspect of this is that the kids get old enough and they understand the principles and they will sometimes say, well, I don't think we should go there or do that. And their conscience is now taking effect and they're, contributing in that respect. I can remember on a trip to the Grand Canyon, a really wonderful family trip that we then went into Las Vegas. And one of our children was offended by just walking the streets there. And that's a good thing from the kid's perspective, but something that is challenging to the parent. What am I introducing to my children? So these are the things we have to be challenged with as individuals in the ecclesia and particularly as parents. Okay, we're moving on to this next segment of our class, which talks about 3 phases, 3 age groups. And we're going to begin with this passage in Galatians 4, verse 3 and 4, 5, verse 1, which just give us this sense that the Bible understands that children are different and that there's a maturing process and that we can be operating under different systems when we're young and then a different, more mature system when we're older. So, for example, as it relates to adults, they can be children in the respect of this passage that Paul is speaking about. He says, when we were children, we were in bondage under the elements of the world. This is the ABCs of the world. And he's speaking about how they were under the law, which operated in terms of the same kind of, practices really of the world. But when the fullness of time was come, and he ultimately goes on to speak about this new way. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So there is a sense in which we operate with children differently, and as they progress, we go to a more mature system of things. Now, look, are these particular age groups magical? 0 to 6, 7 to 12, 13 to 21? I think they're pretty good, but they are not something that we can prove. In particular, they're useful categories, I think, to discuss progression and the different levels at what children are at. There's obviously a continuum here of maturing and progressing. And different children are going to be different. And we have to accept that and work with them as they develop and mature. So with that in mind, again, we're going to, God willing, next week talk about these 3 areas as we dig a little deeper, these 3 phases or age groups. Right now, we want to talk about it more from a progression perspective based on a couple of aspects of this. So let's go to the first one. Let's talk about decision making. And I'd like just to quote another passage here for you. It says, for everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age. Even those by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Hebrews 5:13-14. So we know that there is going to be a maturing in decision making. There needs to be, spiritually speaking, a maturing and a growth here. Now, we have attributed a simple phrase related to decisions here for each of these categories of age. They are not absolute. I just think they are the primary way which we would look upon these particular groups. So in that 0 to 6 age, we are saying no decisions. In the next age, we are saying testing decisions. And lastly, we're talking about advising on decisions. None of these are absolute because, in the no decision category, you may start to do some testing of decisions in those later years in that group. In testing decisions, you might be starting to even get to some advising later on in that period of time. And in advising on decisions 13 to 21, we still remember that there is an infrastructure. There are some things which are non-negotiable. There is structure in our houses, and we provide in our houses standard practices, and we have financial support, even if the children are outside the house. So there are some things that in our inner workings with them will remain non-negotiable. We don't know the exact ages and the exact way to progress through this. And I'd like to say that we can go too fast. There is the possibility in 0 to 6 that we're trying to treat them too adult-like. And there's also then an opportunity missed for them to really understand authority and getting direction and to understand respect and sort of where they are at their age. Similarly, we can go too slow. And if we don't advance, particularly in the 7 to 12 period, all of a sudden we're into the teenage years and we're in a bit of a struggle now because there is so much maturing and development to do and the time is so short. And we don't realize that the children now, as they grow older, are spending less and less time with us, and our impact is less and less. So we can go too fast, I think, and we can go too slow. But the other challenge we have, of course, is that different children are different ways. And we saw that in raising our children, so that not everything is just according to schedule in these nice little boxes. You can be in the scary position, in that last position, 13 to 21, feeling like there's some of the things we should have accomplished earlier on, and we'd feel a whole lot better now that the child is maturing and getting their lives sorted in relation to spiritual things, God and Christ and the truth. And when that's not the case, we could now be quite apprehensive and actually scared of the fact that pretty soon they're going to be making their own decisions, period. And they're not in a position to do that spiritually. So let's think about this from a perspective of each of these age groups. In 0 to 6, there's very few decisions. It's good for children to understand authority and respect. So don't ask them everything. Tell them, direct them, keep questions to them minimal. What are you going to wear today? And you got out what you want them to wear, and they want to wear something different. They scream, they complain. This is where the children need to do as they're told. The same thing with eating. It's on your plate, you eat. You can't just push that aside and go to your favorite things and or then eat dessert having not finished your meal. You don't waste food. There's just things, like napping. Do you want to nap? Actually, there's some kids will say, yeah, but most of them are going to say no. Now, it might sound like we're entering into the basics and some of the things that pertain to the natural, but it relates to the spiritual in the terms of how we're interacting with our children. They need to learn to, and the scripture's directing on this to us, isn't it? Obey your parents, to follow direction. And as we've seen, Israel of old was to follow the ABCs of the law, that under that foundation, they could progress to the mature things of the truth that operate according to faith. So this really is a preparatory phase. I think it's captured here. We don't want to have, parents who are entering into dialogues with their children as if they are adults. And this does happen, and you do see this. And, of course, it happens because this child, like all children, has human nature. And some of them are more in this way than others, but we need to not foster it by the way that we raise our children. And so that's something to keep in mind. They can consider themselves to be adults in the center of the universe. And this is something that we've got to work through with our children. In this particular picture, it sort of shows the mother worn down. A mother can get worn down if these things are not done proactively and definitively and allowed to go on and on and on. This is actual reality in some situations. And, some fathers can be absolutely oblivious to it. Maybe the mother's doing all the child rearing and disciplining, and the father it looks like he doesn't know what's going on. And so, this is a time for parents to be united together and to be strong, because if psychologically you're struggling with younger children, it's only going to be a bigger challenge when they're older. So this is not a stage for negotiation. This is heavily one way. We got the decisions made and we're directing them, and we can start based on their maturity to introduce some testing of decisions, knowing already the answers later on. So when we come to this next group, the testing decisions, once again, we recognize that, again, this is not absolute, but now it's really important at some stage to progress, because even though we might know the answer in some cases, now I'm suggesting that it's very important to know what's going on in the mind of the child. And so here's a case where we'll go out of our way to say, now, under these circumstances, what do you think we should do? What would be a good Bible direction, a Bible example to give us some direction here? And of course, if they're right, there's affirmation of this. And if they're not, then it's an opportunity to talk through these things from a common sense perspective and bring in spiritual considerations to the fore. Now, here's an example. The child is offered to go to the neighbors in an evening for a skate on the new rink that they have. Now, the first question is, do you want to have them go there at all? But let's leave that aside. It conflicts with youth group. The child really wants to go, very excited about this ice rink down the street, and they want to go to the neighbors. Here's a good place to sit down and say, well, let's look at this. We have youth group that night. What do you think we should do? And of course, you're going to learn about where the child is at in their thinking process. And you're going to see how they say it and reason it through. And this is just something that you need to work with, obviously, in this age group as they mature. Look, there's two really important strategies to utilize in the truth, and these relate to children as well. We can have strict avoidances of competing objects of their affections. That is, we cut off some things. We abstain from some things. And secondly, we can carefully restrict those objects so that there's some limited benefit that can be accessed, but the dangers are managed at a safe distance. So I was trying to think of examples of these. And It's actually harder to find examples in the cutoff, entirely abstain, certainly through all of these age groups. And of course, some of these things are age dependent. We won't discuss those today in terms of, when the appropriate time is. But, we said throughout all of this, I don't think our 0 to 6-year-olds are being offered to go to school dances, but we'd had school dances. That's just a no-go, period. You don't go to school dances. This was a cutoff, entirely abstain from dating in the world. That's a no-go. Going to stay-overs at friends in the world. No drugs, no foul language. We didn't have any personal cells with the kids until they were driving. This might be needing some updates by a more modern parent facing a much different situation that we were facing at that time. So what about the carefully restricting? Well, we went to, say things like watching a film. Of course, again, I'll mention the amount of time, the material, the age were all factors in this. It's more complex than just watching films. The use of alcohol, going to a theme park, going to other families' events on their own, joining sports teams, the availability of internet, computer games, and again, social media, which was not really a thing for us that now parents need to deal with. And so lots of these things were in the category of let's carefully restrict and manage. If you're too strict, you can have the effect of kids feeling they miss out on everything. They're not involved in anything, and they can almost regret being at home and looking forward to the times when they can sort of get out and ultimately experience some of these things. And the advantage of, doing some of these things in balance is that you can help them sort through the decision making while you have that influence in their lives. If a child has ultimately no access to the internet till they're age 18, 19, 20, and they're out, then how is it that under your supervision and influence, they're going to learn to make good decisions with respect to that? So that's something to consider. Of course, this is not an excuse to allow for anything that is in itself bad or worldly or wrong. But it is a case that we've got to find a way of rightly integrating these things for this area where we're testing decisions and working with our children to deal with all of these various things in life and put them into perspective. So the 13 to 21-year-old age now is really important because now we're progressing and they're soon going to be making decisions on their own. And it's really scary if you have someone who isn't taking to the truth and getting serious about the truth early on in this stage. You may even be facing some rebellion. And so while it can go very seamlessly for some parents and go really well, stage 1, stage 2 seem to have worked, and the kid is taking the truth seriously and moving forward, that's all wonderful, but that's not always the case. And there can be different things going on with different kids. And even by gender, we found that the girls mature faster than the boys. And so depending on your situation, that's not obviously always the case, but depending on your situation, you're dealing with being in this last phase and wanting to have accomplished some things earlier on. You may not feel comfortable with the decision making that your teenager will naturally make if given that opportunity to do on their own. So really, you do want to be in a situation advising on decisions and mutually discussing things. But things like attendance at meeting, participation in meals, reading the Bible, dress, curfew, working around the house, these things are not the things which are negotiable. But we do need to be moving into areas where they are making decisions. Let's say, the ability to make decisions related to some of their friends and activities that they go to outside the house. These are things that can be discussed. We decided in our family that pretty much when it was getting a little crazy with the number of events going on, that we wanted to keep it to about once a month. Otherwise, the kids lost a sense of their home ecclesial life. They lost a sense of family life. And all of a sudden in teens, they're everywhere, but in their own ecclesia and at home. So to balance that off, we tried to move into kind of a model of about once a month for choosing these other activities. There's lots of choices, and hopefully the choices we're talking about are around serving the ecclesia, what to get involved in, and preaching. And you're in a stage now where you can have adult-like conversations around the Bible. What does this mean? What do we think about this? Let's go examine this. We're talking about the ecclesia openly. This is what's important. That's what's being talked about. And you're reasoning through some of these serious matters. And hopefully you get into a mode of providing guidance and suggestions related to things like education and occupation, friends and relationships. So look, it's not a perfect situation moving from one of these to the other, as we've said, but it really is important to establish that basis in the no decision period. It's very important to test those decisions and to make some real good ground from 7 to 12. And then we're working, with more adult-like individuals who are by nature becoming more independent. And we pray with God's blessing that they make right choices. And sometimes it's a lot of prayer in this particular period of time if things aren't going quite like we'd hoped. Let's look at this in one other dimension, and that is on the basis of trust. Here's a passage in 1 Corinthians 13:11 that says, "When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things." So when you're a child and you speak and understand and think like a child, well, do you trust that child? No. And I'd like to say here that I trust them as far as I can see them, which brings up a matter of importance. And it's a matter of, again, different philosophies and different parents, but it comes down to watching kids, to supervising children. And this can be debated in ecclesial life. Some parents are more into monitoring and others less so. I'm more into the monitoring in this particular age group. It doesn't have to be the parent. It can be one of the other parents. It can be a grandparent. It can be another adult. But I think kids should be supervised in public situations, and that includes ecclesial. And of course, that's a bit of a sacrifice for some, 5, 15 years, depending on the range of your children, to be, making a point of doing that. And the advantage of it is that many lessons can be taught. Now, kids learn to respect the facility and the objects they're in, and they learn how to interact with each other to make sure they share and include one another. It's not all just kind of a controlling mentality here. It's about a teaching, learning, growing situation that's available to us. So look, in this first phase, 0 to 6, we don't trust our kids next to a road. We don't trust them on their own in a public place. Not at all. And this is a place where we need to work with our children very, very closely. And again, some of that's going to be different in different parents, but that's sort of the general thrust of that area, which I'm sure we would all agree with. Number 2, we say there's some trust. Now, trust here we could say is earned. You have to earn trust. Trust isn't something you just give, and we want to give it, but we have to, as parents, have healthy suspicion. We can't just give trust. I think we need to be suspicious. I think we need to, in these age groups, the first 2 phases, is set things up such that we already know what's gone on, and we're trying to find out whether or not we can get the truth, the straight goods from our children. And that helps us build trust. We have to also understand, surely from understanding ourselves, that human nature is deceitful. And while a child can be trusted in one area, it might be that as they grow older, other areas are such that they can be more deceitful and not as straightforward. Temptation is a very powerful thing, and they can have weaknesses. I'll give you an example here. We were very close to a family. I'm talking now not my children family. I'm talking about when I was a kid. And it stands out to me that this family we were close with, we went away. I don't know how long it was, whether it was measured in years or months. I think it was probably multiple years, but not, too long. And I remember coming back and being with that family, and everything seemed to be good. And the kids behaved in a certain way. They spoke in a certain way. We were all together. Then we went out in the backyard. And in the backyard, there's a gate into the common playground area where other kids were. Wow. What a change. I was absolutely shocked. These kids were pulling the wool over their parents' eyes. And the language and the behavior was just strictly like you would see from any child in the world. It was quite the shock to me to see that and to digest that as a child. I just want to be able to, in these early years, catch those things so that we can, and we'll talk about it more, God willing, next week, have the child be truthful and honest and reliable in their speech to us and revealing things about what actually happened in various circumstances. That openness with the parents, so important. As we move on to 13 to 21, here's where, we want to trust more. And that level of trust is going to depend on the individual once again. And if you're struggling with your child, then you may not trust them in certain circumstances. And again, we have to say, don't have your blinders on related to technology and temptation, because there's new things that are coming upon the teenage situation, new situations, hormones and such that now bring a whole new dimension into it. As it relates to couples, which is an important matter here, we know the scriptural instruction in 1 Corinthians 7 of marriage, and I believe it applies to courtship as we move towards marriage in the Lord. And we've always encouraged our children to wait until they've made their decision about God and have their education and occupation in order. And between you and I, we probably exaggerated a bit. We usually said, you wait till you're 21 before you start looking at the guys or the girls. And we weren't 100% serious about that, but we were really hoping that we could control this sufficiently, that they weren't getting involved as mid-teens, because we see that as just too young, and we want them to make a decision, which typically they're making maybe in that time frame, but not always, some later, with respect to the truth, God, and their course of life before they're seeking to have a partner to join them. And look, in the home, it's another area to raise. And I'm going to quote Brother John Martin loosely here. And this is maybe more for the older folks, even though we want to be more impactful with the younger folks here. But Brother John Martin used to say, when people ask about, why there were rules in the house, he says, I do not trust myself. I do not trust the flesh. Now, he actually yelled that out, but I'm not going to yell at you here through the screen. You have to have rules about going to bed. You have to have curfews. You have to have random checks. It's just the sensible thing to do. You do not have couples in a house or in a situation where they're by themselves. This is a massive change in our world. And we have to realize that it's human nature that we don't trust. I can tell you I do not trust myself. Arranging brother. Use the wise counsel when assigning support to say, we're not just sending a brother there to a sister's house to provide support. We don't trust them. No. We want a couple to go with a sister involved in providing counsel and support. It's just not wise. And when people haven't followed this kind of approach, it's resulted in problems. So this is an area where a lot more trust is coming into play. But let's just remember, we are human nature, and teenagers are experiencing human nature in a different way than they've experienced before. Well, look, the time, according to my clock on the side, which I don't have the advantage of the one in front of me now, just at the side, is saying 10:28. So I think I'm going to leave it at that today and just remind you about what is coming, God willing, next week. Next week, God willing, we are going to look at these three age groups more particularly, which allows us to do a little bit deeper dive into each of these age categories. And what we're going to do is suggest to you three things to focus on that are really important in each of these age groups. You might want to think about that in advance. What do you think are the three things? And we'll back it up with a scriptural passage with each of these three things. What do we focus on with 0 to 6, 7 to 12, and 13 to 21? So, Brother Nathan?
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.